Hi, I'm Lee Arbuckle, Native Seedsters, Inc. Worked at developing this technology to harvest native seeds. I'm delighted to be able today to present Mark Majerus, who's headed up 2 studies we've done of the harvestability of native grasses and of the harvestability of native wildflower seeds. Mark's done a spectacular piece of work on a subject that's not been addressed before. Mark, it's been a pleasure. Thanks. Looking forward to it today.
The native wildflower industry is a fledgling industry. Didn't really start until the early 1970s when the first official release was made of a wildflower cultivar. In the 35 years since, 95 different cultivars have been released, or germplasm releases have been released of 69 different species. Right now there's about 450 species that are commercially grown or wildland collected, but only about 16% of those have an official release. This is an indication of the potential for the wildflower industry and the future. The future of the wildflower really depends on harvest efficiency of combining or some other alternate harvesting technique. The seed industry is controlled by the seed certification agencies of each state, releasing as a cultivar or as a pre-varietal release. A lot of the newer ones will be released as pre-varietal releases because it's quicker and get them on the market much quicker. Native wildflowers are harvested either by swathing and allowed to cure and then combine out of the cured windrow, or direct combine, or hand harvested. It's surprising the amount of wildflowers that are actually hand harvested because they've not been able to find an efficient manner to mechanically harvest them. That is why with the native seedster, with a patented counter-rotating brush and comb, we're looking at this study to look at the potential of the seedster as an alternate harvesting method. The study that we did, we're looking at 388 different native wildflower species. These are the ones that are most commonly commercially grown or wildland collected throughout the United States and Canada. This study was funded by the Montana Board of Research and Commercialization Technology, Montana Department of Commerce. We looked at classifying 13 different morphological and physiological characteristics. We did this by looking at local flora, websites for commercial seed producers, and consulting with professional seed producers and or collectors. Each of these 13 morphological characteristics were ranked as to whether they had a favorable impact or a limiting impact on harvest efficiency. And in doing this, we were able to develop indexes for both the standard combine harvesting and an index for the native seedster. Looking at each of these characteristics individually, plant growth form, if it is upright, fairly upright, and the seed head is well exposed, it is easily either combined or harvested with a seedster. If the plants are decumbent, that is laying on the ground, or viney on the ground, that is a limiting factor, and each of those methods will be docked for the accessibility. Plant height, the tall plants, as you can see, the seedster has a slight advantage with the tall because the seedster enacts strictly on the seed heads itself, whereas the combine will cut this off and take in a lot of biomass, which affects the gleaning efficiency of the combine. As you get to shorter plants, both the short and the very short are very difficult to get into the header of either a combine or the seedster. So shorter plants are much more difficult to harvest. Foliage density. If the foliage is sparse, it's relatively easy to harvest with either combine or seedster. It's pretty much the same way with a medium. But as you get to a thicker vegetation, there's a lot more biomass going through a combine and over the sieves of the combine. And the dense foliage actually buffers the impact of the brush of the seedster and making it more difficult to thresh the seed. The type of inflorescence has very little impact on harvestability, whether it is spike, raceme, panicle, or an umbel, corm, or cyme, or even a solitary head. However, if the seed is recessed into the receptacle, you need the extra grinding effect of the cylinder of the combine to knock that seed or release that seed from the head. The seedster, the brush is unable to knock that seeds out of a real tight compact head, and thus it is docked. The position of the efflorescence also plays an important role. If it is well above, as in this sunflower, it's easily accessible by both machines. If it's terminal, meaning it's just right at the very top of all the foliage, it too is accessible. But as you find the seeds well within the foliage or in the axil of the leaf, it is difficult for both the combine and the seedster to thresh that seed from the foliage. Flowering and ripening uniformity is something that you can't find in a book or on a website. You have to rely on the intuitive information that people that are experienced with collecting or growing this material. The wildflowers are notoriously ripen over a long period of time. An example would be the yarrow. You can see where they have flowers that are just flowering, and the ones that have seed and they're starting to shatter, others that are still maturing. Same here. This is all, the seed is already shattered out of this, mature seed, immature seed, and still flowering and maybe two weeks away. So because of the long period of time that it takes to mature, combining hits it. It's a one-shot deal. You get only the mature seed at that particular time. There may be seed that's already shattered, and there's seed that will not be able to continue to develop because you cut off the whole plant. However, with a seedster, you can see a positive rating. This is because of the potential for multiple harvests. Go through a stand when there is a certain percentage of it is mature, strip that clean, and without damaging the immature developing inflorescences, wait a week or so and return to the field and harvest the stuff that has continued to mature. The only limitation with this multiple harvest is that the row spacing between the rows of the crop must align with the tractor spacing so that you limit the amount of knockdown. You do not want to knock down anything in your first trip through and having it still standing when you return the second time. Tendency to shatter. This is also another characteristic that we rely heavily on the intuition of people that are familiar with raising this or seed. The seeds that do not shatter, they're usually recessed into the seed head, favor the combine because the combine is able to knock it out, knock it free. Those that are only slightly shatter, fairly equal tendency, but as you get to the moderate and the severe shattering, it is limiting to both pieces of equipment. This is because It is susceptible to the wind damage, and it is also susceptible to shatter when it first comes into contact with the reel of the combine or the brush of a seedster. Container type. There are several different types of containers in the wildflower species. The capsules or the loments, the follicle, which opens up along one seam, the pods, sleeks that open up along two seams, and the nutlets that have just sort of a cap over the top. Then you have those ones that are recessed into the receptacle, and those that are not contained are usually just on top of the receptacle and readily dislodge. So you can see on the terms of capsule container type, the capsules and pods, no problem with either piece of equipment. But when you get recessed, once again, the combine is required to grind those out of the receptacle and be able to glean those away from the trash. Those that do not have any type of container, that are just stuck on top of the receptacle, the seedster is slightly favored in those. Container integrity is basically how strong the container is. Something like Penstemon has a very leathery, tough container, and the combine is needed to grind those out of it, whereas the seedster can rattle some of the seed out, but really can't dislodge all of the seed. So it's docked a little bit. Moderate, fairly equal, but as you get to the fragile, the seedster has just a slight advantage. But then when you get to something like lupin that has an explosive pod, this is a seed distribution mechanism, whereas the pod starts to ripen. When it dries, it pops open and twists, throwing the seeds a great distance. And this is a problem for both combines and seedsters when you're losing some of that seed prematurely, and there's nothing you can do about it. Seed type has very little to do with harvest efficiency, whether it is a seed, a keen, or a Americarp. And so it's a positive influence all around. So there's, what type of a seed really has no impact on harvest efficiency. Seed size, also a limited amount of impact. The very small seed will leak out cracks of the combine. You have to duct tape it all up. But it also can get caught in the stems and branches that are sent out over the sieve and out the back of the combine. So you can lose some very small seed out with the trash on a combine. And on the very large seed, the combine has a slight advantage because of gravity. On first impact, you may lose some of the larger seed that will shatter directly down when the first contact with the brush. Seed and container appendages is the biggest factor in terms of determining harvest efficiency for both the combine and the seedster. Negative for the combine, positive for the seedster. If you have hairy pappuses or bristly pappuses, scales or awns, wings, hairs, long woolly hairs, or barbs and hooks. All of these things make it more difficult to glean the seed through the sieves of the combine, gets caught in with a straw, and gets thrown out the back of a combine. However, all of these, the bigger and the fluffier the appendage, actually benefits the seedster because the brush is able to grab onto these appendages and pull them into the header. So anytime we have any kind of a appendage, the seedster will have an advantage. Of these 388 wildflower species, 40% of them have some form of an appendage. Now the smooth seed, 60% of them that have smooth seed, the combines will have a slight advantage because they're able to process them through the sieves, and get a hold of them a little bit easier than the seed store does. Seed surface and flowability. This has more to do with the seed after you've captured it. Once it's in the hopper of the combine or the hopper of the seedster, these, whether it's ridged, angular, has woolly hairs or wrinkled, so on, it affects the flowability. Some of these appendages are ground off as they go through the cylinder of the combine, but it also, that grinding effect also breaks up a lot of leaves and stems, making for a lot of trash that ends up in the seed hopper. In many cases, to get the seed out of the hopper, you got to use a stick to chase it out of to put it into the auger and get it out. With seedsters, very little of the appendages are damaged as they are brought in, and with the bottom dump trapdoor, the seed is very easily removed from the machine into a hopper to carry it out of the field. However, it still remains fairly fluffy and needs a little bit of processing, whether through a hammer mill or a barley debearder, to process it down to a flowable seed that will go through a screening mill. The harvestability indexes ranged from a -65 to a +195. We arbitrarily grouped them into anything that was less than 40 was considered difficult to harvest. 45 to 100, moderately harvestable. 105 to 140, easy to harvest. And anything that had an index of greater than 145 was considered very easy to harvest. Comparing the indexes that we received for the combine versus the seedster, difficult 17% for the combine, moderate 46%, easy 26%, and very easy 11%. For the seedster, difficult 10%, moderate 41%, easy 46%, and very easy 3%. You might note that the easy and very easy were 49%, or nearly half of the species were easy or very easy. And these species that were considered difficult for both are generally the very short, and the ones that, because of the little bit higher here, these were not only short, but they had a lot of appendages on them, making it that more difficult to clean through a combine. Go through some examples, representative species for each of the families. The rattlesnake master and the desert parsley, they have a higher index on the seedster side because of the longevity of the maturity, usually more than 14 days for both of those species. And the beech lovage had the advantage with the combine site because of the toughness of the pod and the difficulty in extracting it from the pod. When you get into the legume family, all of these species had a slight advantage because of the toughness of the pod primarily. You might notice here that both the ground plum very low for both. That was because ground plum lays flat on the ground and is very difficult to access no matter what piece of equipment you use. In the aster family, we saw earlier about yarrow, the wide range of time that it takes to mature, and both the goldenrod and the aster, they mature over a long period of time. So these three, they mature over a long period of time and lend themselves to multiple harvests. And the goldenrod and the aster have very hairy plumose pappuses, which make it difficult for the combine. However, on the sunflower and the coneflower, these have the seed recessed deeply into the individual heads, and it makes it difficult for the seedster to rattle them loose. They need the combine cylinder to grind the seed out of the head. This family here, again, it's the the duration of ripening over a long period of time, as well as the willow herb has a very woolly appendage on the seed. The thimbleweed and the columbine have a slight advantage, once again because of the maturity time. The monkshood has a very tough follicle, which is difficult to open, giving it a slight advantage to the columbine. The Scrophulariaceae family, this one has got once again got a very tough pod, giving it a slight advantage, but you notice they're both fairly high. And the Indian paintbrush, slight advantage to the seedster because of the little scales that are around the seed, making it easier for the seedster to knock those loose. We found with all of the two indexes for the seedsters and the columbine that the seedster had a higher index on 56% of the species. The seedster has an advantage when there is an extended ripening period, usually in excess of 10 to 14 days, which makes it have an opportunity for multiple harvests. And anything with seed appendages, 40% of the seeds had some sort of an appendage. The appendages make it difficult to glean through the sieves of the combine, and they are more easily pulled into the seedster. The combine had an advantage for any time that the seed pods were strongly attached or the pods were very tough material that required the additional action of the cylinder and the concaves to grind the seed out of the heads. Both the combine and the seedster were at a disadvantage for anything that had a very short stature and anything that shattered quite readily. Therefore, we have developed index for the wildflowers for 388 different, and these are all native throughout the United States and southern Canada, as well as developed a harvestability index for 195 of the primary grass species. These indexes, the big spreadsheets, are going to be on the Native Seedster website, nativeseeders.com.